Fam, the South Africa drama is back, and MPs went to Kgosi Mampuru Prison today to hear testimony from more witnesses, and there was some laughter amidst the seriousness. For example, have a look at this moment of levity.
Mr. Malema is wearing a suit today, so the screens are quite important for him today.
Chair, when you come from KwaZulu-Natal, you might not be able to differentiate between a screen and a camera. If a camera is here, there's no need for a screen. But for the purpose of proceedings, you need a screen. Thanks.
Yeah, but the chief whip speaks about the suit you are wearing. What do you say about the suit?
No, I didn't want to be confused with the residents here.
As a country, one thing we certainly do well is laugh at ourselves. But it was a serious day, unprecedented for a parliamentary ad hoc committee to be sitting right inside a prison holding public hearings because they are awaiting testimony from someone who is actually currently incarcerated, KT Matlala. But he didn't come today. But because they were in Joburg, they figured, well, let's get some witnesses who are here. So today we actually heard from Lieutenant General Puleng Dimpane, who is the Chief Financial Officer for the police. And of course, an important person in the context of all of the alleged financial wrongdoing and the money outflows from the police. Now, this was a fascinating testimony today because the first thing we learned was that the money spent on the political killings task team, this task team that General Mkhwanazi spoke about in that press conference that he said was being disbanded because it was getting too close to uncovering political corruption, this task team actually didn't cost very much money in comparison to other task teams. For example, there was a task team on illegal mining. Remember when the so-called Zamazamas went down in Stilfontein? There was a whole task team set up for that. Cost R1 billion. There was another task team that cost 950 million rand. The political killings task team has cost South Africa less than half of that, about 435 million. And that goes to show that the argument that was made by Senzo Mchunu and Shadrack Sibia, those people who wanted the task team to be disbanded, that it was somehow this exorbitant cost, was contradicted by the evidence from the CFO today. Now, we also heard, and another thing we learned, was that Senzo Mchunu and Shadrack Sibia tried to suggest that there was this information note that came from the CFO, which suggested that, in fact, the political killings task team should have been shut down, or there was some thinking that because of the costs, it wasn't worth it. But Dimpane said that this note, which came from her, was completely taken out of context. And that knocked a leg out of the argument of those who said that the political killings task team should move to being a more permanent structure that is infused in all of policing work, not a separate structure on its own. Take a look at how Dimpane disputed that argument and said that her information note had been taken out of context.
But when the minister brings this document, I mean, it's an operational discussion between, yourselves as the officials who are signing it off. If you had to hazard, how do you think the minister even knows what you said? Because you said you never discussed this with him. He shouldn't, maybe asked that he shouldn't even know that you had written this comment. Am I correct?
I am not saying he shouldn't know. I am not certain where he got hold of the document. I'm simply saying that it should not then be utilized as if, and creating an impression as if, as the CFO, I took the document and I went to the minister with the document. That is not what transpired. And I'm not saying he is not entitled to have a look at documents in the organization, but I certainly did not give him that document. When the document leaves my office, it goes to the National Commissioner. The National Commissioner will then approve it, goes back to the person who had requested funding. I would request a copy for purposes of my records as well as accounting properly. Probably the executive authority has access to documents and discussions in the organization, but I certainly did not give the minister that document, or General Sibiya for that matter.
So interesting that Dimpane is saying, look, it was sent, but definitely not to the minister, and the context was not that the task team definitely had to be shut down, but rather that this was an internal conversation going on in a kind of preliminary way. So that really puts paid to one of the key arguments that was made by Senzo Mchunu, or at least knocks a piece of the evidence out of that argument. Now, Kat Matlala, of course, is the alleged criminal kingpin who has been pulling the strings in the police and in politics. And he is currently being held because he's been denied bail in an attempted murder case. Now, Kat Matlala is due to testify. In fact, that's why these MPs are currently holding public hearings from this room in a prison, because the prison is where Kat Matlala is being held, or this correctional facility. Now, Kat Matlala sprung a surprise today because his lawyers said that he would not be ready to testify. So this is obviously a major problem. Clearly, he's been given adequate notice. Clearly, if he didn't feel he was ready, he should have told Parliament before all these MPs flew down to Gauteng to make sure that they were there, and completely moved Parliament to a whole different province so that they could hear his testimony. And it looks to me like MPs and the chairperson of the committee are not going to pay any heed to this request for a postponement. It may mean that Kat Matlala protests a bit at the beginning of his testimony, but I just don't see this postponement being granted, given how many resources have already been expended just getting MPs into this place and moving an entire committee into a prison. So I suspect Kat Matlala will show up, or at least MPs will be very dissatisfied if he doesn't show up. Now, if he does show up and he protests, he can do so, but there are still safeguards in terms of making sure you don't lie to Parliament. When you take an oath, you have to say that you'll tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, etc. So then you are bound to actually answer questions. And if you don't answer those questions, then you could be contravening your oath. And if you break an oath, that can be against the law. So it'll be interesting to see, but we want Kat Matlala. I particularly really want to hear Kat Matlala's perspective, because in some ways he may be being used by more powerful forces at this point. And he may be someone whose voice is very interesting in understanding how private actors, maybe even criminal actors, are playing a role in influencing politicians. We want to know what he knew about the minister. He's already given us an affidavit that he says he doesn't know the minister, but a lot of other evidence has contradicted that version. We want to know what was his relationship with Brown Mokgotsi, Shadrach Sibiya, and a whole host of other questions. He started singing like a canary when he was arrested by the police, talking about all these people who he knew, and now we need to get that on the record under oath. And also, for the purpose of fairness, because a lot of allegations have been made against him, we need to hear his side of the story before we can fully make up our minds on this Mkhwanazi saga. Let's move to the Madlanga Commission, because that recommenced today. And really today we had a series of Hawks officials. One of them was Major General Ibrahim Kadwa, and I want you to take a look at what he said about that famous operation where the police launched an arrest at the house of Kgosi Molefe. Kgosi Molefe is another alleged criminal kingpin who apparently has been working with Kat Matlala in this cartel that the police commissioner calls the Big Five. So Kat Matlala is one of the Big Five. Kgosi Molefe is another one of the Big Five. There was this arrest operation at his house. And at this operation, bizarrely, one police team was effecting the arrest, and then another police team from another division of the police, the Hawks, came, and it appeared to be disrupting the police making this arrest, which suggested that Molefe somehow might have been able to influence the police to get one of their branches to stop another one of their branches arresting him. In any case, let's take a look at what Major General Kadwa said about that day.
Yeah, on Friday, the 6th of December, 2024, at around 16 hours, I was on official duty and I was on my way to the Hawks National Excellence Awards, which was held here in Pretoria. At that stage, I received a telephone call from our former national head, General Libya, who recently retired. And on this call, he inquired whether I was aware of any Hawks operation underway in Sandhurst, in Johannesburg. My immediate response to General Libya was that I am not aware of any operation that is undertaken. Then General Libya instructed me to verify whether any of our units were conducting such an operation in Sandhurst, and then he WhatsApped me the specific address, which was 137 Empire Place in Sandhurst. When I received this instruction and speaking to him, I literally understood it to mean that I should send our members to go and specifically verify if there are Hawks members operating on that particular address. I had no knowledge where General Libya got this information from. I just basically received whatever the information that would have come along, Commissioner.
So a couple of interesting things emerged from this. Number one, nobody could say where the head of the Hawks, this one group that was coming to kind of disrupt this arrest that was happening while the political killings task team, the other police group, was effecting the arrest. No one could say where the head of the Hawks, a certain General Libya, actually got this information that there were people trying to impersonate the police when they were effecting this arrest, which was itself actually legitimate. And sadly, no one seemed to ask, but I guess you can kind of understand that, like, your superior in the police tells you, hey, it looks like there's a crime being committed. Someone's impersonating the police. Can you go there? You don't necessarily always say, how do you know that they're impersonating the police, my superior? But at the same time, we still need to know who gave this order for the Hawks to go to a place to interfere with the political killings task team affecting this high-level arrest of a very senior alleged organized crime figure. So no one could quite tell us that, but all of the Hawks people who testified today, there were 3, denied that there was any interference. They said that they went there in good faith. They went there to try and verify whether there was actually this impersonation operation, and once they had verified it, they left. But under questioning, the commissioners did ask, are you often sent to verify these operations? Was this the first time? And most of them said, no, we don't usually get called to verify. So again, there's something fishy about the way this thing happened. And the only way we're going to get to the bottom of it is if General Libya, the head of the Hawks, testifies before the commission and tells us who told him that this so-called impersonation was happening, and why did he think it was urgent enough for an entire team to be sent, including a helicopter, to be sent to someone's private house to make sure that the police weren't being impersonated. So an interesting day where we have taken one step further in our understanding of what is happening around allegations that criminal cartels have penetrated the police. I just wanted to also give you an update because I haven't done an analysis in a while in the studio because we've been out and about interviewing all kinds of people. Last week, if you're just catching up, we interviewed the Malaysian Prime Minister, a major milestone for this channel, interviewing a sitting Prime Minister. And I'd urge you to go check that out. He was very interesting on the G20 and shifting global power relations. But also, we interviewed billionaire businessman Christo Visa, at one point the most wealthy person in South Africa. And he gave us a very rare interview. We sat down for an hour and I picked his brain on his life story, what it was like to build businesses like ShopRite and Pep, but also his views on the country. And of course, one of the key flashpoints at the moment is South Africa-US relations. On the one hand, we've got these bogus and ridiculous claims of Afrikaner persecution in South Africa, or white persecution in South Africa, which most right-headed people dismiss as absurd. But on the other hand, we've got the US Trump administration actually believing these falsehoods and basing its trade policy on this conspiracy theory. And of course, it puts South Africa in a bind. So I put this to Christo Wiese, and I thought his response was very interesting. And I want you to have a look at it, and then we'll analyze it a little afterwards. Take a look at what he said about SA-US relations and, of course, this idea of Afrikaner persecution.
In our situation in South Africa, if I can now speak as a white and as an Afrikaner, I always tell my children and my colleagues, the way for us to deal with what, to make this country work, is know your place. Don't try to be bigger than you are. Know your place, and that comes back to my point. Talk to each other.
Yeah.
And try and find common ground and do things together. I don't mean that you're a lesser citizen.
Sure.
Now, when it comes to America, I mean, I think, I wouldn't want to go on record. President Trump will block me from the US if I say what I really think about a lot of the things coming out of the US.
Wow.
But again, as South Africa, we have to know our place. We are a small country.
Sure.
And to keep poking the bear, it cannot be a good strategy. Try and put your case, but put it softly, gently, back it up with facts. One of the things that kind of bothered me with that interview with Trump in the White House was, if I remember correctly, the defense on the farm murders was, no, but it's not only the farmers that get murdered.
Yeah, everyone.
We murder each other.
We murder everyone.
Yeah.
I must just say, when you interview people, you get to meet the person and not see them from behind a screen or behind a camera. And Christo Wiese is a very decent and humble human being for all that he has achieved. And it was quite an honor for him to agree to the interview because he doesn't do interviews very often. Having said that, in terms of what he said, very, very interesting. In fact, if you go back and you look at when I pose the question to him and I speak about the so-called Afrikaner persecution, he rolls his eyes in disdain for that idea. And then he says something quite provocative. He says a lot of people are going to, be angry with me for saying this, but what he's saying is that the Afrikaner community must, quote, know its place. In other words, he says, don't think that you are bigger than you really are. Now, what I think he's trying to say there is don't make your suffering through crime seem as if it's magnified beyond other South Africans. Every South African suffers from crime. People who identify as black, white, colored, Indian. There's no special crime that only attaches to special categories of people. So the first thing I think, and then of course he said, if I could really say what I wanted to say, I don't want to say it on the record because I might get blocked. So it's very clear that Christo Wiese disagrees with this idea of Afrikaner persecution. And I think it's a brave thing for him to say as a prominent Afrikaans person in South Africa. He then goes on to say, but having said that, someone more powerful or a country more powerful than you can be wrong. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you must poke the bear. And what he means there is don't antagonize a country, especially when it's more powerful than you are. Now here, obviously we can't take our foreign policy to the extreme, but I do think President Ramaphosa has struck the right balance of late in being a little bit more strident in calling out the falsehoods that are coming out of Washington. That doesn't mean that all American people are mistaken. If anything, it's a Trump administration thing. But I do think for the dignity of South Africa, we should dispute this falsehood that's being peddled, because if we don't dispute it forcefully, then we just look like we can be walked all over. But at the same time, obviously, we do have important trade relations. And in an interesting interview last week that I had with ex-Goldman Sachs Sub-Saharan Africa chief, Colin Coleman, he was saying what we really should be doing as South Africa, obviously try to minimize and limit damage with the Trump administration, but in terms of trade, it should be business-to-business conversations. And in some ways, you can bypass the State Department and the White House by just going directly to the businesses who have interests in South Africa. And there's probably a bit more of a rational conversation going on. So interesting. And then he spoke about the Trump meeting, and there was a funny moment where, he spoke about our defense to the fact that, well, it's not just Afrikaners who face violence. Everyone faces violence in South Africa. So we all kind of, that doesn't necessarily inspire confidence in our country, but I guess it's the sad truth. Anyway, go check out that interview because it was a really fascinating and rare look into the life and thought of Christo Wiese. Fam, like, share, subscribe, help us reach 400,000 subscribers. Why don't you buy yourself some SMWX merch for you or for someone you know who's an avid watcher and supporter of this channel? Go to smwx.store and get a surprise gift for that person you know who likes SMWX. We'll be back tomorrow with more streams, more analysis, and this week with more interviews. Don't go anywhere, because this channel is fast becoming a fixture on South Africa's current affairs landscape. Hope you have a good one. See you on the next one. Aye.